If we only wanted to be happy, it would be easy. But we want to be happier than other people, which is almost always difficult since we think them happier than they are. If you weren't triggered by the title of my video, then you were probably triggered on your way in with this quote, because many of us at some points in our lives have punched ourselves with that thought and that idea that my life should be better than this. From a very young age, we are encouraged to think and dream and hope about our future and who we could be and what it would be like. And you know, it's cute when a little 5-year-old says something like, when I'm older, I want to be a superhero. And we maybe giggle to ourselves and smile really nicely to them, but we don't correct them. In fact, maybe we go as far as to actually lie to them and tell them that it's possible. And while that might be okay when we're much younger, as we grow into adulthood, it seems that we carry the same unrealistic expectations of what our lives could be like and also should be like. And don't get me wrong, like, it's not bad to hope and dream and think about your future. I think to some extent, actually, if we place it in the right frame of mind, like, it's a good thing. But if we carry certain expectations that are unrealistic, but they go uncorrected, then we can end up finding ourselves in these places where we are not only unsatisfied, but frustrated at the pressures that we've put on ourselves to be these things. Those pressures don't just come from internal, they can also come from external. We know that they can come from other people around us, maybe the expectations that our parents or our friends or our bosses put on us, or we think that they've put on us. They can come from the world around us, for example, social media and movies and the society and culture that we live in that tells us what it means to live a full life. And they can even come from comparing ourselves to other people, which brings us back to the quote I shared at the start, that we don't just want to be happy, we're more satisfied when we feel happier than other people that we're seeing. In my previous video, I mentioned a book that I've been reading by Dr. Meg Jay called The Defining Decade. And while I don't agree with every single thing that she says in the book, I think she definitely brings up some great points which are worth learning from. And in one of the chapters which inspired this video today, it's titled My Life Should Be Better on Facebook. And she talks about this idea of what we think our lives should be looking like and what we should be doing and where we should be. And she says that there are actually some major issues that can crop up in our lives if we start to think about it in this way. In essence, she says that firstly, we can end up living inauthentically, meaning we're not living true to ourselves. We instead decide or choose to live in a way that we think we should be living, or how we think others think we should be living. Secondly, she says we can end up living untruthful lives, living this life that seems one way to everybody in our world, but seems another way to us and how we actually experience it. And it can come to that point where our social media lives look better for others than our real lives look to ourselves. And thirdly, she says that we can end up living an exhausted life where we're trying to scramble to show everyone or show to ourselves that our lives are different to what they actually are. And even for some of us who do end up reaching these goals, we can come face to face with our humanity. We realize that actually, even in accomplishing all these things that we wanted to accomplish, we're still not as strong as we thought we were. We have real emotions, we have real experiences and real thoughts that come and almost disrupt our lives. And even at our best, we can still find that there is somebody better than us that we can compare ourselves to. And so I guess one truth that can already bring us freedom is coming to the realization that even when we get the lives that we thought we should have or wanted to have, that actually we will still get to that place of feeling unsatisfied unless we start uncovering the deeper issues and confronting the lies that maybe we've walked in for so long, and instead choosing to embrace a different truth. What we'll find is that we keep going in this same cycle over and over again. And from a Christian perspective, the Bible tells us the first and probably the biggest lie that started this whole issue of my life should be better than this. And it starts in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible, which tells the story of God. And we're introduced to God as this creator, this powerful creator that literally speaks the universe into existence. As well as creating the whole universe, the Bible tells us that God creates man and woman, and he puts them in this garden called Eden. And there they live and they work and they rest and they they live this beautiful, perfect, ideal kind of life, kind of like the life that we say we want when we say our lives should be better than this. But for them, the reason why this is all the case is because actually they're living together with God. They are living in communion with Him. But it all starts to go wrong in Genesis 3 when we're introduced to the serpent or snake that is described as being cunning and deceptive. And the snake approaches Eve and says, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the Garden of Eden?" That's where the lies begin to happen, because actually it wasn't that Adam and Eve couldn't eat from any tree in the Garden of Eden, but they couldn't eat from this one tree. And that's where the thought that my life should be better than this can also start, because just like Adam and Eve, we can be deceived into thinking that our lives are lacking and that God is withholding something from us, that rather than us seeing everything that we do have, we're lulled into thinking that we have nothing because we don't have everything. But the truth is that in Genesis 2:17 it says that God had said, "You are free to eat from any tree in the Garden of Eden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die." And what it meant by that is not only would they eventually die physically, which they weren't meant to, but they would also die spiritually, that they would become separate from the God that created them. But then the snake went on to tell Eve an even bigger lie. He said that you will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And this is where it all started to go wrong, because in saying that, not only was the snake saying that they would be like God, but in fact the promise that they would be God, that they would have everything, do everything, and be everything. And that's kind of similar to our desires when we say that our lives should be better than this. It's because we don't just want more, we want everything. But everything can't be found outside of God and within ourselves, because actually He is everything. But a bigger truth was also that they already had everything. In fact, in Genesis 1:27, it says they were already made in the image of God. In saying that they were like God, what it wasn't saying is that they were God, but actually that they reflected Him in so many ways. Just like when a parent has a child, you can say that the child is kind of like the parent because they have the same features as the parent, the same DNA, and maybe even the same mannerisms, but we wouldn't say that the child is the parent, but that they reflect the parent. And in the same way, and even in a bigger way, man was created to reflect the image of God. Man was created to have the same breath, the same spirit, the same holiness and perfection that God has. He'd given them authority and rational thinking and moral thinking like He had. But in that moment of disobedience, it's like all of this was disrupted, and the Bible says that their eyes were opened and they realized that they were naked and were ashamed. And that all sounds weird and complex, but in the simplest way, what it's saying is that they looked at themselves, and not just their outward self, but even now grew a realization of their inward self, and they didn't like what they saw. They were ashamed and were resentful of all that they had and all that they were. Kind of like the shame and resentment we hold for ourselves when we say that my life should be better than this. But this story isn't just the story of Adam and Eve. This story is actually all of our stories. Then the Bible says in Romans 5:12 that therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, so also death was passed on to all men because all sinned. You see, the broken condition that man carried, the sinfulness, the shame, the resentment, the distance from God and separation from God that Adam and Eve had was passed down to all generations, and it became not only their reality but our reality as well. Maybe this idea that my life should be better than this is not a wrong thought, but it's the right thought misplaced. Sure, in desiring to accomplish many things and to have many things and to be significant or to be approved by man, all these things are probably wrong and will never satisfy us. But what if behind these superficial desires there's actually a deeper desire to be released from the sin and the shame that we carry about who we are and what our lives look like, and instead to return to the original image and design that God had had for us? What if the desire for perfection on earth is actually rooted in a deeper desire for the perfection that God designed us to have, but in Himself? Maybe we have sold ourselves short in the hopes and the desires and the thoughts we have about what our lives should be like, because God designed us to have a life that is better than this. Not in the way that we imagined, but actually in a greater way than we ever imagined. And so where do we go from here? Like, what is the better that God designed for us to have? And how do we actually walk in that? Well, I guess we'll find out as we continue the conversation in part 2.